I didn't realize how quiet it was until the car started moving. No traffic, no pedestrians, no glow from nearby windows, just the sound of tires on wet pavement and a phone screen that suddenly went dark in my hand. That's when I understood something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not movie wrong, just wrong in the way that makes your body go still before your mind catches up. I had been drinking, I was tired, and I trusted the idea that pressing a button meant someone else was watching. That night, no one was. After that ride, and a few others that came too close for comfort, I made a rule I've never broken since. I don't accept rides that take me into remote neighborhoods. Because isolation doesn't create danger, it removes witnesses, and that changes everything. Before we begin, I am Night Echo Whispers, and if you value real stories that teach us to stay alert, consider subscribing so you don't miss our next warning. Now, listen to what happened.
He accelerated. I dialed 911 with 2 fingers, keeping the phone under my thigh. My thumb hit the call button, and I whispered into it, "I'm in a car. I'm not with my Uber." The dispatcher answered with an ordinary voice that felt like a lifeline. I whispered where I was, the make of the car, what it looked like. She told me to keep the line open, and very quietly coached me through a code. Act natural. Make a small gesture through the window if you can. Keep them talking. She told me she was sending units. She told me, "If anything changes, tell me." It sounded so small and so huge at once. I put my hand out the window pretending to smoke, just like she suggested. I remember how stupid that felt, pretending like I was in a movie, until I saw the headlights behind us. A patrol car eased into the lane, and then another. I did not understand how quickly it all happened. The cop cars surrounded us. The driver slammed on the brakes when he realized the doors were being opened by uniforms, not me. I could not breathe for a second. The adrenaline so thick my chest hurt. They got me out. They told me to stay low, to keep my hands visible. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. The officers led me to the curb and asked questions that blurred together. Later, the officer put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll sort this." He told me, as the official kind of detail that makes things real, that the man had prior convictions and had served significant time. He said it like a fact I needed to know. Later, when I asked for specifics, the police said more. The kind of things you read in a case file. But I tell you only what I was told, that his record was extensive. I wasn't the only puzzle piece in a file. I spent the night in a hospital bed because I couldn't stop shaking. I had cuts on my palms from gripping the door. The hospital asked me routine questions, took my statement. Uber later sent a message saying they were investigating. Police said they would follow up. That was the first time I realized what a difference being in an actual rideshare vehicle makes. When your trip is through the app, there's a digital breadcrumb trail. Riders assigned to drivers, a record. Getting into the wrong car stripped all of that off me. He could have taken me anywhere, a remote stretch of road, an empty rest stop, a quiet industrial park, and there would have been no app trace tying me to that driver's route. You'd think that would have been enough to stop me from ever being careless again. I wish that were true. A year later, I was leaving an office holiday party. It was early December, and we were all a little buzzed, a little loose. The group had filtered out. I stood under the building's awning and ordered a ride. The app said my driver was Ed, and the profile photo was a man with a friendly grin and clean haircut. The name felt ordinary and safe. A tan SUV pulled up.
A man in his 30s with close-cropped hair and a loud laugh popped open the rear door like we were joining an after-party. He introduced himself as Ed and asked where I was headed. The app had said he was 5 minutes away. He claimed to live right around the corner. He was chatty, in that way that makes a drunk stranger seem like a friend, asking where I worked, what I did, who I lived with. He told little personal stories. Nothing about him made me stop the door. Then he turned off the main road and onto an older street lined with trees. The streetlights were sparse. The houses looked empty. He said, almost offhand, "My place is just up here." I noticed the GPS on my phone. The little route overlay that should have been guiding us was still trying to find us. His hands were on the wheel, one elbow resting on the open window, and his smile softened into something that made my stomach flip. He started asking more personal questions about my family, whether I had kids, whether my boyfriend got jealous. He said things like, "You don't even look like you need someone. You're too young for all that." The way he said "too young" was deliberate, like he was measuring me. He pulled into a narrower side street, and I saw it, a faint dirt path between two houses, a short stretch that led toward a cluster of townhomes cut off from the main road. There was nobody around. He slowed, and the tone of his voice changed too. He said, "You know, if I didn't have my kids at home, I'd invite someone over." He made a joke and leaned in, the light from the dashboard catching his face in a way that put the rest of the world into shadow. When we got to my address, I realized the photo on the app, the neat haircut, the clean-shaven smile, was not the man driving me. The man in the car had a beard shadow, a different jaw, a scar along one eyebrow, I remember because it caught the light. I took a quiet breath and lied. My boyfriend is actually waiting at home. It felt like a small, dirty trick, but I used it to create an invisible chaperone. He backed away, asked me only once where we were, and then said, "All right," with a shrug. Later that night, I checked the app to report him. The profile picture still showed a different man. Uber emailed me that they were looking into it. I filed a police report. There was a disorienting gap between the digital identity and the physical presence in the car. If I'd been taken down a pitch-dark lane toward a subdivision with gated roads, I would have had fewer options. A driver who can deviate into quiet streets can make a ride vanish from the radar of witnesses, of bystanders, of anyone who might notice a car idling at the edge of a neighborhood. And the thing about side streets and narrow lanes, they're remote in their own way. They're not on main arteries where other cars pass. They're edged by hedges or construction sites. The fewer people around, the fewer chances of an interruption.
That night, I walked inside and watched the blinds close like a reflex, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling for a long time. My friend asked why I looked so pale. I could only tell them I'd been lucky. A different kind of luck, or maybe coincidence, saved me the next time. This was a trip that should have been the most mundane, a quick ride to catch a train. I was pregnant, not far along, but definitely not wanting to miss a connection, and a friend had booked an Uber for me to get to the station. I remember thinking, I'll be careful. This is a shared ride booked by a friend. What could possibly go wrong? The driver kept saying things that made my nerves itch. Quick comments about how he knew shortcuts and insistence that he knew a faster way through the alleys behind the shopping center. The GPS dot on my phone pulsed as if it were searching for signal, and the driver casually ignored it. He turned into an alley narrow enough that the side mirrors almost brushed the brick walls. We were no longer on a straight line to the station. We were weaving through a service lane boxed in by delivery doors and dumpsters. He would speed and then brake hard. He muttered under his breath, "Cops are probably on my tail." And I remember thinking, cops? Why would they be on him? He pulled into a loading area where a sedan was parked, and a woman in a coat was standing by a bench, alone, looking at her phone. The driver made a gesture, and the woman moved closer. I watched her get into another car that had been waiting, hesitated, and then slid in. The scene felt orchestrated. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't. I started talking, loudly, explaining I had to catch a train, and listing the times, the platform, my entire plan. The driver shrugged and said, "Don't worry, I'll get you there." But the farther we went, the more I felt like we were crossing into edges no one would see us in. We passed a row of derelict warehouses, then a stretch of new construction where half-built houses sat with plastic tarps and exposed foundations. The kind of place people stop building and walk away from, where pavement turns to gravel. When we finally reached a busier intersection near the station, my relief was so great it made me nauseous. I thanked him like a person who survived a storm. Later, when I told my friend about it, she said she'd been watching the app and seen the route shift. I filed a complaint with the company. The driver's in-app behavior, the way he drove into alleys and turned onto service roads, looked like someone who preferred places without witnesses. That edge, half alley, half construction site, felt like a remote neighborhood in miniature. Out of sight, out of mind. After that, I started to notice small patterns in the things that made me feel unsafe. The driver's photo didn't match the man. The phone screen was suddenly dark. The route on the app didn't match where the car was actually going. A mention that my house is just up here, followed by a turn onto a street with no streetlights. Those weren't always red flags on their own. Taken together, they were a map of risk. If you can be taken somewhere where nobody's around, your options shrink fast. You'd think being hyper-aware would make you paranoid, but after a sequence like this, it just felt necessary.
there was a different night where I learned how quickly proximity and pressure can escalate. It was a Friday, and I had a date. I'd gotten dressed up, the kind of outfit you hope makes you feel good instead of noticed. We had dinner in a neighborhood that was lively earlier, but as we left the restaurant, the night had thinned. Fewer people on the sidewalk, bars closing, the city quieting. My date and I ordered a ride for the three of us, me, him, and the idea that we would split an Uber home. The driver pulled up, a man in his 40s with an easy way of smiling. He opened the back door for me, and then, without much prompting, he looked at me and said, "You can sit up front if you want." It was casual, like an offer. Maybe to a man that simple offer would be an invitation. To me, it felt like a shove. I hesitated. Sitting up front had always been a small comfort in certain situations. You feel less hemmed in. But something in the way he said it made my skin goose. He took the front seat himself and began talking directly to me about things that were not his business. Whether I wanted children, my relationship history, whether I'd ever been alone in a car with a stranger before. His hand kept moving in little ways to indicate how comfortable he was, how anchored he was in the space. The car turned off the main road. The neon signs faded. The houses got further apart. He told me, smiling, "I like to meet people. You read a lot on their faces." He reached for his phone, and the screen went dark. The dashboard light was dim, and suddenly the app's route, which had been visible in the rearview mirror as a reflection, was harder to read. He made a joke about how easy it would be to stay in touch, asked if he could take me out again. He said things that were almost flattering and wholly unsettling. I felt boxed in. The three of us in the car were suddenly in a shrink-wrapped space without witnesses. I pulled my phone into my lap and texted the restaurant, typed my own name and a line about how long it would take me to get home. I called my friend and put the conversation on speaker with the volume low enough that the driver would think it was just background noise. I told the friend the make of the car and the driver's rough description and asked him to stay on the line.
I was doing a handful of things I'd later tell myself were smart, and things that, in the moment, felt like the flimsiest lifeline. He laughed at me for looking tense and said, "Relax, I'm not dangerous." When he said that, it was the kind of line people use when they want you to stop worrying, and that's the most alarming thing, how sure some people are of the cover they invent. He turned on a road that grew more and more silent, a row of houses with yards that had seen better days. The map on my phone was tiny, and I couldn't tell whether we were heading toward my place or not. The light in the car made his eyes look detailed. I remember thinking, if he gets out of the car, I could bolt. If the car stops in a gated development with one entrance and no passing cars, I'm trapped. At that exact moment, he glanced in the mirror and said, "You should get up front so we can talk more." My throat closed. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The friend on the line said something about the ETA getting longer, and I heard the dispatcher voice, an automated tone in the background that lives inside phones when you are trying to seem ordinary, but you aren't. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't move yet. I texted the restaurant to push my reservation back by 5 minutes. I told the person on the line my location in clipped sentences so it would register if anything happened. The driver slowed and said, "This is your stop." We were at the edge of a development, houses set back with low visibility from the main street. He stopped. He looked over and smiled the same smile as when he'd offered the front seat. He opened his door like any driver would, but his eyes lingered. That's where I had to decide. Get out into a quiet cul-de-sac with a man who'd been pressuring me, or force the moment into the open in some other way. My hands were cold. I picked up something small and folded it in my fingers. My ticket stub, a small receipt, a ridiculous talisman. And then the car behind us honked once, a short, sharp sound, and the driver's whole demeanor changed. He straightened, muttered something about being late, and drove off. I got out and walked quickly, and it felt like my legs were moving from molasses. It's the tiny things, like a horn or a passing delivery truck, that can change the calculus in those moments. Isolation removes those things. A remote neighborhood, a dead end, an empty parking lot. They give predators the quiet they want. They take away the interruption that might otherwise save you. I told the company, and they removed the driver, at least from my app's perspective. Police took a statement and said they would keep an eye out. I felt an aftertaste of shame and gratitude for small interruptions. The honk, the truck, a friend on the line. Those tiny intrusions into solitude can be life-saving. By now you might be thinking these are isolated incidents, unlucky coincidences. You'd be wrong. I want you to notice the pattern.
Different drivers, different nights, but the same slideshow of cues. Profile mismatch, dark phone, route deviations, my house is close, insistence on front seat proximity, detours into alleys or half-built developments, and always, the isolation factor. Remote neighborhoods don't just make a driver more dangerous, they make every other safety net less effective. I had another close call after that, and this one is the memory that still sometimes wakes me in the middle of the night. I was 19 and stuck outside a gated apartment complex because I had lost my key. I called for a ride like any kid would, thinking about nothing but getting inside and crawling into bed. The driver pulled up in a truck that looked like it was headed for a construction site. He parked, and for a second everything felt normal. Then he drove past the gates instead of into them and kept going. We rolled by empty lots where a handful of skeletal houses were being built, lots of gravel and construction equipment sitting like asleep beasts. My phone was on low battery. The app showed a pin far to the left of where we were. I told him, quietly, that he'd passed my complex. He smiled and said, "Oh, I know a shortcut." That shortcut took us around the whole perimeter and then down a dirt track past lots that were dark and silent. There were no porch lights. There were no neighbors coming home. I remember the radio playing nothing but static. When the truck finally stopped, it wasn't at my gate. It was at the edge of a half-built street where developers had left piles of lumber and plastic tarps, where weeds had taken over the sidewalk. He said casual and perfectly cruel, "You can walk the rest." He left the engine running. He did not get out. I asked him to wait to drop me at the gate. He looked at me for a long moment like he was deciding whether I was worth the bother, and said, "I don't have time." I did what 19-year-old pride and panic forced me to do. I opened the door and ran into the empty development. I remember crawling under a chain-link fence and hiding behind an electric box because my battery was dead and I had no signal. I couldn't call anyone. I pulled my jacket around me and stayed as small as possible. I could hear distant traffic like someone else's life. I felt like I had vanished. Family found me hours later after someone checked the ride's drop location on the app and realized it was wrong. The police told me later that the GPS coordinates were inconsistent with the ride's route. I filed a report. I stopped taking rides like that after that night, or so I told myself. When the man left me at the edge of a gated development, I felt erased from the map. It was the most literal form of remoteness. No lights, no passers-by, no stores open. If that driver had wanted to keep me there, I had no way out.
That's why remote neighborhood is more than a location. It's a state where all the little safety things stop working. The moment you are in a place where you can't see people, can't make noise that matters, and where a car can disappear into a cul-de-sac, your options narrow down to what you have in your body, your legs, your breath, a phone with a sliver of charge. And yet, even after all of this, a story I will tell you next sticks with me because it was so small and subtle and nearly perfect in its threat. It started like any other ride, a crisp night, a driver who seemed normal in the dim light, and the kind of casual conversation that lulls you into thinking the world is benign. He offered the front seat. He had a way of saying things that made me want to leave, but his manner made me question whether I was overreacting. He had a voice that could have been comforting. He asked where I worked, where I was from, then slid into questions about personal life and children, as if we were old friends. He made a point of telling me stories about other passengers who liked to sit up front and how polite they were. He told me where he lived, just a minute away, and suggested places he could take me in case I wanted to meet up again. He was smooth. We hit a stretch of road with fewer lights. The app showed a route that looked like it might be taking us through a quieter development to shave off time. He reached for his phone without looking, and the screen went dark. Really dark, not just dimmed, like someone had put it in their pocket. I could no longer see the route reflected in the rearview mirror. There were no cars in the opposite lane. We were suddenly alone. I started planning. I thought about making a scene, about screaming, about opening the door when we stopped, about doing anything that would draw a witness. I felt the pressure of an audience that wasn't there. The driver turned onto a narrow road with houses set back from the street. There were hedges that blocked sightlines. He slowed. At that very second, exactly then, something happened outside the car. A dog barked from a porch as if summoned. A neighbor pulled his garbage can into the alley. A light came on in a window. It was one of those tiny, meaningless intrusions that feel like a miracle. The driver's hands tightened. He looked in the mirror. He made a small curse and started the car again. He kept going past my turn. He said, "I'm going to stop over here." The car idled at the edge of a small residential circle that had one entrance and a thick line of trees. "This is where I will leave you for now," at that place where a man who had just turned off his phone and steered toward isolation was idling at the mouth of a cul-de-sac, and I was calculating the next second like it was a test. I sat with my phone in my lap, the battery stubbornly low, the screen barely aglow, and I felt every inch of the distance between being seen and being invisible.
The little lights in the houses across the street were pinpricks of safety. The trees were a wall. His casual manner had cracked into something else. There's a pattern to these moments, and it's not just bad luck. It's a string of small choices, mine and others, that lined up and left me somewhere I shouldn't be. The wrong car removes the app's trace. The driver with a mismatched profile can take you into a quiet lane. A darkened phone means there's no easy record of where you are. A talkative driver who insists you sit in the front can make your personal space tiny and limit your ability to act. Put all those together and drop a passenger into a neighborhood where no one's walking their dog at 1 a.m., and the situation becomes exponentially more dangerous. I thought I was careful. I thought I could handle little risks. But these nights pushed me to the edge of what I could bear and made me change how I moved through a city. I don't accept rides that will take me into remote neighborhoods anymore. Not because I'm better than anyone else, because I learned the hard way how solitude and a stranger can stack up into something that feels like danger. Hold on to that. There's more to tell. How a dispatcher's code actually kept me alive, and how reporting did and didn't matter afterward. How some drivers were removed from platforms, and how the police response could be both life-saving and bewildering. But first, understand this. Remote neighborhoods aren't just about geography. They're about being unseen, unheard, and unhelped. They turn a wrong choice into a near miss, and a near miss into a rule that I now live by. The car is idling. The trees are close. The driver is smiling in the dim light like nothing is wrong. My phone is warm in my hand. I make a decision, a little thing that feels enormous in the moment, and then I do it. I made a choice in that idling car. I decided not to stay and see what he would do next. I put the phone down into my lap and thumbed the screen until it lit just enough to look like I was scrolling. Then quietly, I pressed the call button and dialed 911 again with my other hand, keeping the phone flat and my voice a whisper. The dispatcher on the line this time was the same calm voice that had coached me before. She asked me simple, steady questions that cut through the spin of my fear. Where I was, what the car looked like, whether the driver had said anything. I told her in short pieces. She told me to make a small, casual gesture with my hand out the window, like I was fiddling with a ring, and to keep the line open. I set my palm on the sill and slowly moved my fingers, like I was checking a ring. The driver glanced in the mirror and muttered something under his breath. His smile tightened. He tapped the steering wheel with one knuckle and said, "I'm gonna stop here a minute," like he was doing me a favor. The car rolled forward a few feet and then stopped at the lip of the cul-de-sac.
I kept my hand out the window until I saw a taillight sweep by on the main road. Just one car, nothing dramatic. Then, while I was still on the line, I opened the door like it was nothing and stepped out. My legs felt like rubber. I told myself to walk with purpose, pretend I had somewhere to be, use the motion as a deflection. I walked to the nearest porch light and kept my shoulders squared. The driver called after me, but the sound of his voice was distant, like it belonged to someone else's memory. Moments later, a patrol car rolled up the cul-de-sac, and lights that had been only pinpricks in the distance flared blue and red. The dispatcher told me officers had been sent to my location and that I should stay where I was. Relief poured over me in a hot, sharp rush. They asked me things I couldn't always answer coherently. My speech came in fits. They took down a statement and told me what they could about how quickly they'd found us, that the combination of my calm report, the car description, and the code they'd taught me had made the difference. I was shaking as I walked away from that car, and I remember thinking, with a clarity that almost made me laugh, that the choice to get out might have been small, but it had felt enormous. Later, after police reports and an Uber complaint, and the kind of awkward outreach that companies do when something scary has happened, I sat in my apartment and tried to sew the night back together in my head, and failed. I replayed the smell of the car, the way the dashboard light fell on his face, the dog's bark that had come like a blessing from nowhere. That bark, those garden lamps, that honk from a passing vehicle, random nuisances that saved me. They're not dramatic, they're ordinary, and ordinary things can be life-saving when you are in a vulnerable place. You can see why I draw such a hard line now. A remote neighborhood doesn't have those ordinary things in abundance. It has a hush, and that hush gives predators a margin. It removes witnesses, even if the road looks familiar and tidy on a map. It makes the small interruptions that keep us safe feel far away. A few weeks after that, I had another near miss, and this one involved one of the things I had started to pay attention to the most, the driver's phone. It was a late Saturday, and my boyfriend and I had been out with friends. We were both sober enough to make decisions together, which makes what happened feel even stranger. Our app pinged a driver, and a quiet sedan pulled up. He seemed fine at first, polite, talkative in the kind of way that feels safe because it's so normal. But then, as we merged onto the highway, he flicked his phone screen down. It wasn't a dim, it was dark, like someone had cut the glow with their palm. We watched him take an exit that the map did not expect. The little blue dot on our phones hesitated for a beat, then jumped.
The driver signaled and then put the blinker left twice, like he was considering another course. My boyfriend, who knows me and knows what my face looks like when panic comes in tiny waves, reached for his phone and said, "Hey, where are we going?" in a voice that wasn't accusing, just asking. The driver's hand tightened on the wheel and his foot lingered for a second where a brake should have been. He admitted, casually, that he needed to go past the town line because it's faster this way. We watched the signs slide by, and then we both realized he was heading toward the kind of exit that leads to smaller towns, the 2-lane roads where there aren't many cars after midnight. My boyfriend told him firmly, "That's not our route," and the driver said something about a shortcut. My boyfriend stood up and said, "We're getting off at the next stop," and there's nothing confrontational in saying goodbye to someone who's driving wrong, except the assertion of your intention. The driver's face changed, like the casualness had to be refound. He took the next exit, and when the light let him, he pulled over to the curb. We got out, hearts pounding, and walked away toward a cluster of stores that were still open. The driver called him a name that was intended to be small, and then drove off. That's the difference when you're with someone and not in a lonely stretch of road. The same dark phone, the same deviation, could have put us further out where there were fewer gas stations, fewer lights, fewer witnesses. The closer you are to town centers and well-lit avenues, the more options you have. Remote towns and sleepy neighborhoods shrink those options. Another time I was alone and had a situation where the app's breadcrumb betrayed me. The ride dropped me at a point on the map that, according to the app, was my entrance. But when I stepped out, the gate was locked, the porch lights dark, and the path to the door looked longer than it had on the map. The driver had said he would wait, and then after 10 minutes he pulled away. I stood there on the street and suddenly felt the full weight of being invisible, not just to passers-by, but to the system itself. The confirmation the app shows can mean nothing if you're in a place with no lights and no phones working with full bars. That night, I learned to always check that the pin on the app is not just near my address, but at a clear place to be dropped off, in sight of active homes or businesses. Sometimes police response is fast and capable. Other times it's frustratingly slow or bureaucratic. After the wrong car night, I remember the officer's hand on my shoulder and the clear sense that he took me seriously. In other situations, I was told the officer's shift was done, or that the report would go into a pile. Reporting to Uber often felt like shouting into a system that could suspend a profile, but not necessarily answer all of the questions you wanted resolved.
They did investigate. They did remove some drivers from their app. For me, the procedures were a partial comfort. They didn't heal the nights afterward when my chest tightened at the sound of a car door. There was one instance where I watched another woman's ride nearly turn into the same script I'd been reading in my own life. I was at a bus stop when a car pulled up and a woman climbed in. When I later crossed the street to check, I saw the driver lean toward her and then slow down in a stretch that had nothing but a billboard and an empty lot. Someone else drove by, a delivery truck, and the driver's hands went slack. I told the woman later what I'd seen. She thanked me with a look that said she'd felt something but had been unsure. That's the subtlety of predator behavior. It seems normal at first, and sometimes it is indistinguishable from ordinary niceness until it isn't. We live in a world where technology has given us tools that can help and tools that can be manipulated.
The app tracks routes and records rides, but if you're not in the app's car, that protection disappears instantly. Drivers can switch profiles or have someone else's photo on their account. Phones can be turned dark. Routes can be altered. The fundamental vulnerability is the same: being alone in a place where fewer people pass, where the lights are fewer, and the options to be seen are limited. Remote neighborhoods amplify every one of those vulnerabilities. After the last handful of nights that made me feel permanently unsafe, I started to change the way I navigated the city. I started to look for light and people before I committed to a pickup. I began to check the driver's face against the photo and to wait for the car to stop and the driver to say my name before I opened the door. I told friends about what I'd learned, not to blame myself, but to share the concrete things that saved me. Saying I'm on the way to someone, keeping a dispatcher on the line when needed, or declining a route that ends in a cul-de-sac with no lights. I also learned boundaries with fairness and with shame. I own the choices I made, the times I climbed into a car too quickly or trusted a laugh that sounded friendly. I don't want my stories to sound like lectures. They're confessions. They're me saying I made mistakes. I want others to learn from them. I also want to make clear that none of this suggests a passenger is responsible for another person's criminal intent. The responsibility, always, lies with the person who chooses harm. I only want to show how isolation amplifies risk and how small cues can be warning lights. The emotional aftermath is still a thing I live with. I sleep with lights on sometimes. If a taxi pulls up suddenly on my street late at night, my pulse spikes. I once sat frozen at the curb because a man was walking close to me, and I couldn't tell whether I should make eye contact or look away.
Those are the invisible scars of walking home through nights where your internal alarm went off more times than you'd like. But there are also practical habits I rely on now. I text a trusted person my ride info when I'm alone. I try to wait in well-lit areas. I walk into places with more people rather than towards quiet side streets. These are not guarantees. They are choices that tilt the odds away from isolation. People have asked me whether I think rideshare companies can solve this. I don't know. They've implemented features and policies, some of which helped in individual cases. But policies mean less when you are alone on a dark road. That's why my rule is so clear. I won't accept a ride that ends in a remote neighborhood, not because I'm stubborn or fearful, but because I've felt what that remote silence does to the resources you have to protect yourself. When you are off the main arteries, in cul-de-sacs, in gated developments with one entrance, in half-built subdivisions at night, witnesses are scarce and options crumble. It's that removal of witnesses and of interruption that changes a micro-risk to an emergency. You might ask, so what should you do instead? I'll say again, this isn't a how-to manual. It's a collection of decisions that worked for me in moments that were messy and improvised. But there are things I wish someone had told me more clearly years ago. Wait for the app's confirmation and make sure the driver says your name. Compare the photo in the app to the person behind the wheel. Avoid openings into neighborhoods with one entrance at late hours. Keep your phone charged and your battery saver off when you expect to travel. And don't be afraid to call 911 if you feel wronged. As I experienced, a calm dispatcher can sometimes coach you through a small signal that becomes a lifeline. I also want to say something that matters more than steps: empathy. After these nights, I felt a shame that was heavy. Shame for being naive. Shame for being a target. Shame for what could have happened. I want anyone listening to understand that shame is a lousy companion to survival. It makes people hide and stay silent. If one thing comes out of me sharing these stories, I hope it's that you will be kinder to yourself and kinder to others who've had similar scares. We make choices with the information we have at the time, and sometimes that information is wrong. Stories are how we correct course. There are other small lessons that threaded through my nights. The dispatcher's code, something as simple as pretending to smoke or placing your hand out the window, is not universal, but it was an example of how a clear instruction from a calm person on the line can buy you time. The sight of another car passing, a dog barking, a porch light flickering, those tiny interruptions are often what shift the balance in a tense moment.
The driver who insists you sit in the front seat often wants to compress your personal space and remove your ability to act. The driver who tells you, "My house is close," and then cuts onto a dark road is a red flag for the kind of isolation that matters. The profile photo mismatch is not proof of criminal intent, but it does mean the digital guardrails you rely on are weakened. I told the stories in detail because the title of this video was a rule: why I never accept rides in remote neighborhoods again. That's not a fear-based pronouncement. It's a pragmatic boundary built from real nights of fear and lucky escapes. Remote neighborhoods are not bad places by definition. They're often calm, quiet, lovely places to live. But late at night, when you are alone and the city has thinned out, they create a playing field where predators can act without interruption. That's the causal link I keep coming back to. Isolation amplifies risk. So what do I actually do now? I wait in lit areas where people are moving. I ask the driver to say my name before I step in. I check the app photo and the car carefully. I tell someone when I'm heading out alone. I try to avoid routes that end in dead ends or gated developments after dark. And yes, sometimes that means walking a few extra blocks to a main road. It feels inconvenient sometimes, but inconvenience is nothing compared to a night I don't want to relive. I'm not telling you to live in fear. I'm telling you to live with a margin, to be aware of how small cues compound into real danger, and to choose differently when your life is on the line. If hearing my stories helps shift the margin even a little for one person, if it makes someone pause before stepping into a car that's headed toward a quiet development at 1 a.m., then telling this feels like the right thing to do. I still think about nights that almost broke me. I still flinch sometimes at a late-night ding from my phone. I still check app photos twice. But I also carry gratitude for those interruptions that saved me. The honk, the barking dog, the patrol car that eased into a lane just when I needed it. Those things are ordinary miracles. If this resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a friend who takes late rides. There's a short safety checklist pinned in the description with the few simple things I check every time I order a car. These stories are mine, but the lessons are yours to use. Stay safe out there.